Yesterday, big monumental Dodd-Frank Wall Street reform bill, fix it, tweak, whatever you want to call it. What does this mean moving forward for community banks as they start to plan for the regulatory structure in the year ahead?
Well, it means the regulatory beatings will stop. We've been losing, Kevin, a community bank or a credit union about every other day in America since Dodd-Frank was passed. I mean, ironically, since Dodd-Frank was passed, the big banks got bigger, the small banks got fewer, and the taxpayer got poorer. And so now, finally, under President Trump's leadership, under Senator Crapo's leadership, this is going to change. I wish the bill was a little bit bigger and bolder, but you know what? It is to do what the president says. It is doing a number on Dodd-Frank. And to some extent, the big debate has not been regulation and deregulation. It's kind of smart regulation and dumb regulation.
33 Democrats supported that yesterday.
Yeah, we had a good number in the House. I wish we would have had a bit more. They had almost 2/3 of the Senate to support the Senate package of bills. And I'm also very happy to say, immodestly, that over half the bills started in the Senate. About 2/3 of the regulatory bills that push back on the bureaucracy came from the House. It's really a pro-growth bill. So, number one, fortunately, we now have a 3% growth tax policy. We need a 3% growth regulatory policy, especially when it comes to banking and capital markets. This is the banking portion, and again, it did pass with a strong bipartisan vote, and we expect to have it on the president's desk. And so what this means is people throughout America, are going to have better options to buy homes. They're going to have better options to buy cars, put food on the table.
What's next? Are you optimistic that there could be another type of deregulatory package that moves before the midterms, or is that not realistic?
Well, no, it is very realistic. I'm not quite ready to sign a blood oath that it's going to happen, but we have a guarantee from the Senate that they will vote on a package of bills that we have worked on that really is more about capital formation. So S-2155, Kevin, as you know, is mainly a regulatory relief bill for banks. What we don't have, and as you probably know, in America, 80% of our corporate debt comes from capital markets. It doesn't come from banks. We have a very different financial system than much of the other industrialized world. So we've had in the past something called a jobs series of bills, jumpstart our business startups. In fact, the very first series of bills were signed into law by President Obama. Yep. And so this is all geared towards venture capital, to startups, to accredited investors, small M&A brokers. We already have a package of bills like this in the House. Many of them have passed by over a 2/3 margin. So I'm trying to work with my Senate counterparts to say, okay, we've got the banking piece done. What we don't have is the capital markets piece. And so that's coming next. And I hope we're going to get this done in the summer, and I'm optimistic.
I popped into the CFIUS hearing yesterday. It came after Secretary Mnuchin testified in the Senate. There was a bipartisan amendment from Senator Chris Van Hollen, a Democrat from Maryland, that would make it more difficult for the president to lift the trade restrictions against ZTE. I didn't notice that in the House yesterday. Do you have any concerns about the president's proposal to lift trade restrictions on ZTE?
Well, one, I actually reserve the right to see the details of what the president is going to end up proposing. So I want to see what the president is proposing. Clearly, when sanctions are announced, we want sanctions to be imposed. But the president is our chief negotiator. I understand this is in the context of our greater trading relationship with China. And obviously, it's in the context of the security and peace on the Korean Peninsula. Yes. But if we're going to have sanctions, they ought to be imposed. And so I'm looking for that explanation of exactly what the administration has in mind. And many of us are concerned. I share those concerns. But I really want to have the administration unveil the entirety of the package. I want to hear their side of the story. And so I don't want to jump the gun in that regard.
In terms of what we're seeing in the market with regards to the back and forth with China, obviously the developments of whether or not that June 12th summit is going to happen with North Korea leader Kim Jong-un. What do you make of that, Chairman, as all of this continues to be so quickly evolving?
Well, I am concerned. Trade is so important to America, and the president, I give him great credit for his tax policy. Again, 3% growth tax policy. He is on track to give us the best regulatory policy since the Reagan administration. But if they're not careful, they're going to lose it all if we end up in a global trade war. I hope that the president's negotiation strategy proves brilliant on a bilateral basis and we end up with better trade deals. But at the end of the day, trade is not a zero-sum game, and trade is important. I got to tell you, I was at a breakfast with Larry Kudlow the other day with a bunch of members of Congress. Every single one of them, including myself, talked to Larry about still our aluminum producers, our users in our district who take these imports and, in my case, turn them into either shelving or buildings, and they would be hurt. They would be hurt by these steel tariffs, and we said, please share this story with the president. It's about American jobs, and frankly, it's about American consumers as well.
Do you think that he's going to ultimately lift those restrictions against China? Are you advocating that he lift those restrictions on steel and aluminum tariff imports, or to exempt them, rather?
Well, again, China has been a bad player. I want to make sure that we are focused on those who have not lived by the rules of the WTO, those who by hook or crook or pressure are taking our intellectual property and our technology. So if there was a nation state that was deserving of some type of new arrangement, it is certainly China. I just want to make sure that America isn't hurt, that we don't cut off our nose to spite our face. But we have got to ensure that this involuntary transfer of intellectual property and technology stops. That's wrong, and we cannot. And the president is leading on that.
There is a looming fight happening right now in the minute and a half that we have left or so. About the Farm Bill and the Republican caucus and whether or not that ought to be tied to immigration. What do you make of that, and what is the status of that this morning?
Well,
because it's moving fast.
As one who grew up working on a farm, my dad was a farmer, my granddad was a farmer. I don't believe in the farm program. I don't like it. I never have liked it. Others in my party agree with it. I think, frankly, we lose our moral authority to deal with other forms of welfare when people making six-figure incomes are getting it. So, number one, I don't want the farm bill tied to the very dramatic welfare reform to help people off of poverty onto work. Much less do I see any tie necessarily to immigration, which is another big issue that we have to tangle. So I think the old quote from Mark Twain is, I am grateful I could answer so rapidly and confidently and say, I don't know the answer to your question, Kevin.
Chairman
I don't know how.
Hensarling quoting Mark Twain the morning after the Dodd-Frank bill. I love Mark Twain, Chairman, so we appreciate the time.